On today's program, Rabbi Shmuel Bowman of Operation Life Shield speaks with ICEJ Canada Executive Director Donna Holbrook of a time when his wife was attacked. ICEJ Canada Public Affairs and Media Consultant Christine Williams talks about the silence of the churches on anti-Semitism in Canada. And Israeli youth Yoav Bowman speaks with Canadian Executive Director Donna Holbrook about diversity in the IDF.
We were with our friend, Rabbi Shmuel Bowman. We've done different segments with him, but this one is a little different. And I want to talk about your wife, Leah, who we love and adore. She came under an attack, and I'd like you to share with our audience, what was that like for her?
So, first of all, literally today as we're recording this is the 6th-year anniversary of that attack, literally this week. So there are no coincidences. My wife is a tour guide, Leah is a tour guide, and she happened to be on that particular November day guiding and meeting her group. She had a couple of people in her group from New York, and she was at Jaffa Gate when along came an Arab man, and this is during the height of the knifing attacks that were going on at that time 6 years ago. And he approached my wife and said, "Slicha," which means excuse me. And she thought this is going to be one of the many people who is constantly interrupting her when she's guiding and probably asking for directions somewhere. And so she lifted up her head, and as she lifted up her head, he then proceeded to take out a very heavy glass bottle and began striking her over the head multiple times until she collapsed and passed out. We actually have police video footage of this event because there's cameras all over the place. She's gone, she's down and out, and he then takes off, and the tourists went actually running after him. The police are actually watching all this happening, and they see where he's running, and they're literally waiting for him down the street, and he was arrested by the border police of the IDF. Now, what happened is that she then came to. Everyone's gone, and she's clearly...
She was left on the ground?
On the ground. She got up. She was on her own.
How could
she could definitely feel that she had been struck. Obviously, there was blood and everything. And
now, she'd be wearing a hat.
Exactly.
Correct?
She's wearing a headscarf.
Yeah. Oh, a headscarf.
And so she's wearing a headscarf as an Orthodox Jewish woman is wearing.
Right.
And that headscarf really did save her life because it added the extra padding.
Yeah.
I don't think he anticipated that would be the case, where he struck, which was right on the soft spot of the head, and that saved her life. It also was her Hebrew birthday.
Oh.
And there's an idea that you have an extra special blessing on your Hebrew birthday. So she had that going for her. It took place at the gates of Jerusalem. And my wife likes to say that important things happen at the gates of Jerusalem. What the enemy is trying to do is trying to take sovereignty away from us. And the gates of the city, they determine who has sovereignty. That's where in biblical times the courts would meet. That's where the people would be preaching. The gates of the city were very, very, and they are still today. And so having attacks at the gates of the city are definitely a sign of, I want to take sovereignty away from you. And my wife would not let that happen. She survived. The way that things transpired is that everything was a lie from the perspective of the terrorist. He lied his way through the entire court case. At one point in time, lie after lie after lie, and we even asked our lawyers, how can the judge allow this? To which the response was, all they're doing is lying. They're always lying. They're used to this already. He served 18 months in jail. That was about it. One thing is for sure, it was not a lone wolf attack. We don't really even believe in the concept of a lone, that's even possible.
Correct, yeah.
He was motivated by the Palestinian Authority. He was paid by the PA. This is a person who, by the way, was not a Palestinian, but rather a a Arab Jerusalemite, someone who had Israeli citizenship, and actually wasn't poor and impoverished. This is a person who had a degree, and actually while he was in prison, actually got another degree, and that's what happened. My wife, thank God, survived it. And she was back in Jerusalem with bandages on her head the following week, claiming the city of Jerusalem, sending out messages throughout the entire country to please come to Jerusalem. This is a city that has God's protection, and plus the police are watching everything. And she continued guiding, and thank God. So
that's a woman of valor.
She's a woman of valor,
and she claimed back what the enemy tried to steal away. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you want to hear more about the story, come to Israel, and you can meet her in person.
She's amazing. She's taken us on many tours, and for our young adults, we just love you both. Thank you, Shmuel.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, this is Jude Hodson with ICEJ Canada, and I'd just like to tell you a little bit about the Word from Jerusalem. It's our very special bi-monthly magazine that comes directly from Jerusalem. You can have it sent to your home, or you can view it online. All you need to do is just to go to icej.ca and take a look there if you want to look at it online, or call us. Our phone number is 1-866-324-9133. Again, that's ICEJ Canada for the Word from Jerusalem.
Up next, ICEJ Canada Public Affairs and Media Consultant Christine Williams sheds light on anti-Semitism in Canada.
Welcome to Inside Israel with ICEJ Canada. Today I have with me my colleague and friend in the ministry, Christine Williams. We're going to discuss something today, Christine, that is really heavy on my heart. We've seen a stark rise in anti-Semitism, not just in the Middle East, that's always been there since the founding of the State of Israel, but in the Western world. And again, it has been on a steady rise for decades now, but never has it been so massively spiking since the beginning of 2021, particularly around Ramadan, the Jerusalem Day, and then the preceding conflict that took place. Operation Guardian on the Walls is now what it has been called, where there is over 4,500 rockets fired from the Hamas enclave in the Gaza Strip to innocent Israeli civilians, and then, of course, Israel's response. However, we've seen, because of that, the spiraling out over social media with influencers, comedians, Hollywood elites, major criticism, which has spun out into anti-Semitism. Now, Christine, I wanted to talk today with you about something that was even more concerning to me. Was because of the massive anti-Semitism that was happening. We saw on the streets of Toronto, Jewish people being beaten in Montreal, pelted with rocks and frozen bottles, synagogues defaced, threats, cars with young men in Edmonton looking for the Jews, Jewish businesses, restaurants, a restaurant here in Vancouver that was basically attacked. She had to close down for a few days because she was just Jewish Israeli. What was the most concerning to me, Christine, is the silence of Christian leaders. You know, we're so ready to jump and to speak out against attacks against the black community, or anti-Asian hate, or terrible tragedies in the indigenous community, but we see so much silence in regards to anti-Semitism. What are some of your thoughts on this, Christine?
You know, I don't say this lightly.
Yeah.
I don't say this lightly, Adam, but I believe that church leaders are going to have to answer to God for this. First of all, aside from the fact that Jesus was from the house of David, Yeshua, a Jew, and given that there is a strong Palestinian movement, and it is, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, it's accepted among the Palestinians that Jesus is, quote, a Palestinian. This is how it's deemed to be. The Palestinian narrative is one of, they call resistance against apartheid, against racism. And we're not going to politicize this because we want to talk about what's going on in the church, but this does lead up to why we see this kinds of trend going on in the churches. So there is this belief out there that the Palestinians are being victimized. Right. A lot of people don't even realize that the victimization is a plot. It is highly coordinated by the Palestinian leadership. There's a site, Palestinian Media Watch, that records a lot of what's going on PATV. And they are instructed to hate Jews. And this is historic. Long before 1948, the same Grand Mufti of Jerusalem that we know about that worked with Hitler was fighting in the Middle East a resistance against having Jews settle there. A lot of it had to do with having Jewish people in that area that was supposed to be inhabited by Islamic states. Right. And Muslims, period. So we have this problem that started at the birth of Israel in 1948. We saw what happened, an attack on the new state of Israel. It kept on going, 1967, 1973, and the resistance continues. The chant we hear from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It means that Israel must be destroyed from the river Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. This is an attack on the state of Israel. And when we see things happening like Operation Guardian of the Walls, people tend to think there's a lot of Palestinian lives lost. But the reckless disregard that Hamas has for life, they are being used as human shields to actually rack up the number of deaths. This has been reported again and again and again, and it makes Israel look a certain way when Israel is trying to protect its very existence. Now, there's something in the Christian church that's ascribed to. One is replacement theology, which is just, it's dark. I want you, in fact, to say a couple of words about that, Adam, because I wanted to talk more about the influence of what the Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center that we see in Jerusalem. I wanted to talk about Sabeel for a bit, but you have a few things to say. I know you do when it comes to replacement theology. This is big for you.
Absolutely. I do see that a lot of the silence amongst the church, because look, we're willing to speak out against almost everything else. But why is nothing mentioned about the Jewish neighbors in Canada that are living in fear, that are taking off their kippas and hiding their Magen Davids, their Stars of David, and they're wondering, where are all these evangelical Christian friends? And you mentioned it. I believe replacement theology is a huge factor in the mainstream church. We're talking from your institutional large church communities, Catholic and Protestant, Anglican, but then even in the evangelical world, which we're supposed to be, supporters of Israel, this has seeped in. And replacement theology is the belief that Israel is now replaced by the church, and all the promises of God to Israel, particularly in the Old Covenant scriptures, are now applied to the church, and Israel is no longer relevant anymore, which is absolutely not true, because as soon as you get into that, you are putting holes in the rest of the truths of Scripture. And if God's promises to Israel are no longer good anymore, then what means that he's not going to keep his promises to you? So we understand that that's totally bogus, but that is an issue, and anti-Semitism is behind it. But one of the big things, and again, I want you to talk then about Sabeel, but right at the end, let's also talk the fact of cancel culture and fear, and there's a lot of that as well. People pleasing. It's people pleasing. It's you know what? This is not popular. We don't want to talk about Israel because there's a huge, massive movement. For example, there's this one social media influencer, Bella Hadid, who is very pro-Palestine, anti-Israel, and she has alone 60 million plus followers. That's more than all the Jews on the earth. So can you imagine the fear that even pastors have? I'm not going to sound popular.
What about the fear of leaders, Adam? I mean, here in Ontario, one thing, and I'm going to call names, okay? Doug Ford, he's been criticized, and you may have a different view when it comes to the whole coronavirus and why he's doing what he's doing. He has cracked down hard on this issue with coronavirus, that social distancing being maintained and so forth. In fact, it got so bad at one point that he ordered police officers to stop people randomly in the street and ask them where they're going and so forth. And police came out and tweeted, "We're not going to do that." And he came out apologetically saying, he really cares about lives. He's sorry. He went a little too far in the whole bit. But weigh that together with these pro-Palestinian vicious protests that are saying things I can't repeat on this broadcast against Jews, inciting violence, using the worst curse words. It is sickening, Adam. Why is this being tolerated during this strict lockdown that has seen our economy go under? Why is this being allowed where thousands of people are not following these rules to slam Israel, curse Israel, and attack Jews? Why is this going on? We see it in America, we see it across Europe, we're seeing it in Canada, and people don't want to talk about it. There's a frustration that I keep hearing from the Jewish community and for Christian Zionists. What is happening here? Why are the authorities not dealing with hate? We have a prime minister that constantly talks about fighting hate, having a zero tolerance policy against hate. Where is he? And where are the churches? Now that brings us to liberation theology. And very briefly, I'm going to say that Christians are trained to have sympathy for the underdog. Yeah. They have been trained that the underdog is the Palestinians. And I'll tell you very briefly how that happened. Liberation theology actually came from South America. And the reason it came forth, the concept was because there was a huge class gap between the poor and people in the church and the upper class and so forth. And a group of ministers said, this is wrong. This is not what Christianity is about. So they introduced the concept of liberation theology, that all people are created in the image of Christ, which is perfect. Amen. It ended up traveling to South Africa, which is perfect as well, because blacks suffering under apartheid is an absolute no-no. They should not be tolerated, and especially under Christianity. In fact, anyone who cares about human rights. But wait a minute, that concept of liberation theology and the underdog ended up being taken up by the whole Palestinian agenda, where in a document called Kairos Palestine, where the Palestinians were dubbed the new African blacks, and the South African oppressors was Israel, with no mention as to Israel being constantly attacked. No mention that there's a pay for slay to be killing Israelis, and the Palestinian Authority is paying money toward it. This is heartbreaking, Adam, and I don't understand. There is no excuse why Christians are quiet on this. Maybe they're afraid for their charitable status, I don't know, but how far do you go in silence when you see people being targeted, suffering, calls for their destruction, being killed in Israel, and then making it look as if they're the ones that are victimizing the Palestinians? This to me, I don't get it, Adam. Maybe you do better because you get to meet church pastors and so forth. I mean, I have tried to witness to some pastors because I was working with a Jewish lobby once, and a lot of them don't seem to understand what the real issue is. They just go along to get along and say, well, look, we want to help the Palestinian underdog. We think Israel's doing this and this, as preached in Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center, that labels Israel the occupiers, apartheid. But this has ingrained itself in the World Council of Churches and in many domains that we see in the church, and it has no place anywhere, let alone in church.
Christine, we so appreciate you bringing light to that. We're going to continue talking about this, Christine, even in some future segments. Thank you, Christine, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I believe there is power in prayer, because prayer changes things and people. We are living in the last days before the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. When you are filled with the power of the Holy Spirit, you can speak the word of God with boldness. No one can stop you. No one can stand in front of you. No one can stand in your way, because you will have victory in Jesus. You will have power, the power of God, and no one can stop you.
Up next, Yoav Bowman speaks with Donna Holbrook about diversity in the IDF.
Today, we have in our home Yoav Bowman from Sderot, Israel. Welcome, Yoav. Now, have you had opportunity to, I guess you would be a soldier also alongside Ethiopian Jews who,
Absolutely.
and they're coming in by, I guess the last of them will be coming through. Christians too, and Druze who are very loyal to the nation of Israel in serving, even though they're Muslim. Have you had much interaction with Christians in Israel?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you mentioned, in the IDF, there's such a great variety of soldiers. Everyone really has their place. And we also understand that they come from different cultures. So the IDF is referred to as a melting pot, okay? But not a melting pot in a way that everyone is unanimous, but a melting pot that everyone brings their special qualities and work together. So for example, we have a Bedouin brigade, and they're like native to the land, and they know how to track things. So they're trackers. And I've heard a remarkable story just the other week of a soldier in Golani who, when he was in Lebanon, the Second Lebanon War, they went in, and a friend of his went off the road, which he shouldn't have done, and he found himself on a rock. And suddenly they realized that there are mines all around where he's standing. It was a miracle he made it that far. What they did is they brought a Bedouin tracker who was together with their unit, and he traced his footsteps and walked him back. It took him about half an hour to get through like 10 meters, and he traced his own footsteps back, and that's something that we couldn't have done without him. So everyone is utilized, and we have so much value and so much appreciation for everybody who sees themselves as part of this country. Doesn't matter what the religion is.
So now, with the Christian young adults, so what is your relationship with Christians in Israel?
So, I mean, living in Sderot, right? So first of all, there's the plaques that we see on the shelters.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes you run into a shelter, you're like, oh, cool, hey, Christian, that's ICEJ, that's that church, that's that organization. And that itself is
how does that
heartwarming.
make you feel?
So good. It's the best. Yeah,
but other people that you know, the other Israelis, so does that change their perspective about who we are as Christians and what we're doing?
Yeah, I mean, you need to know that most Israelis don't know that there are Zionist Christians. It's to them, it's wondrous. They have no idea. And to see that is already a big deal. I mean, with all the history that Judaism has had with Christianity, they don't know to say, no, that wasn't them, that was them. They don't know. So for them, it's a huge deal. I know Bibi Netanyahu has really made it much more prevalent that there are Zionist Christians. He acknowledges them in many events. And that has definitely raised awareness.
He has spoken for us. And then, in fact, one of his messages came from the embassy for the Christians for worldwide. And that was really quite meaningful, quite wonderful. Well, I hope that we have changed the horizon and the thinking of many Israelis, and we do the same thing with MDA, Magid David Adom. That's like Red Cross here, and so they're actually running through the streets. Yours are stationary, the bomb shelters, but we're happy to partner. We've been doing that since 2006. So we have a long friendship with the Bowmans, of course, and your dad, and happy that we can also be so vital to the safety of the Israelis on the ground, because we know what it's like. So, or we can. I was actually under attack.
Oh, were you? So you know what it feels like.
I know, but that didn't deter me at all. It's so anyhow.
I think it's also important. Touching on this, Christian and Jewish relationship, what we have in common is that we believe in God. We are both people of faith, and I think also that can really explain why we're not scared of being in Israel. Because we have faith. We know that this is the land that God has His eyes in from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, and it's God's country. He protects it. So.
And we're called to come alongside of you, and we're doing that with the Aliyah, returning the Jews home, and it's a wonderful experience for all of us. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell our Canadian viewers?
Come to Israel. Come to Israel. It's wonderful. I know it's been a little bit tough with, COVID-19,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I pray that this will end soon.
Yeah. So we-
Come to Israel, it's beautiful. We have great hummus and sderot. You got to try it.
I'm on the next plane.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Yoav.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Donna Holbrook. Audrey Ruth Peer was one of our members. She had two regrets in her life. One was that she didn't have children, and the other one that she never came to the land of Israel. So when she passed away, she left an estate. We undertook the fund and we divided it 4 ways equally. And it went to a petting zoo for orphan boys near Tel Aviv. It also went to build 2 new music rooms at Bet Yosef up at Haifa. We also helped to complete a playground for another orphanage to the south of Israel. And then it enabled us to restore our scholarship for Christian young adults. These are new ambassadors back to Canada who are sharing their love of Israel. Would you consider being a shomer, keeper of Israel, in your state giving? And that leaves a wonderful legacy here in Israel. I'd like to thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. And be sure to visit our website at www.icej.ca or call us at 1-866-324-9133. And for our Canadian residents, be sure to ask for your free Canada-Israel pin. Through your contributions to ICEJ Canada, you can participate by giving to Haifa Home for Holocaust Survivors, Women at Risk Red Carpet Project, Operation Life Shield Bomb-Proof Shelters, Mentoring Programs, Aliyah Support, Children's Projects, Israel in Crisis, Israel Aid, Magan David Adam Emergency Services, Christian Friends of Yad Vashem, Scholarships for Young Adult Leaders, ICEJ Canada Media Fund, Gift Estate Securities Fund.